They don't tell you what comes after your world collapses. Not when you lose your job. Not when the relationship ends. Not even when the spiritual awakening finally hits you like a tidal wave of clarity. Because in that moment, something inside you breaks. And it's not just heartbreak. It's not just fear. It's the self you thought you were slipping away. And at first, it feels strangely peaceful. Like finally taking off a costume you didn't realize you were wearing. But then comes the silence. No more dreams that light you up. No more version of you to protect or chase. Just a blank space. And that's where most people get lost. In this video, we're going to talk about what happens after ego death. Not the mystical bliss people imagine, but the messy, quiet middle where your old self is gone and your new self hasn't arrived yet. We'll explore why you feel stuck, even when you're craving change, how to understand and work with your resistance instead of against it. What Carl Jung can teach us about finding soul-level motivation, not the kind that pushes, but the kind that pulls, that whispers, that remembers you. So if you're in that in-between space right now, tired, confused, unmotivated, but somehow still quietly hopeful, you're not broken, you're just in a sacred pause. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll have a new way to see your stillness, not as failure, but as the soil where your truest self is waiting to grow. The crash. What happens when the self you knew disappears? You don't always see it coming. Sometimes it arrives like an earthquake, a breakup, a breakdown, a diagnosis. Sometimes it's quiet, like one morning you wake up and nothing feels like you anymore. The job you once loved now feels like a costume. The goals you used to chase don't make sense. You look in the mirror and recognize the face, but not the person behind the eyes. It's disorienting, like the lights went out on a life you built with everything you had.
I remember speaking with a friend who'd built a successful marketing career, 6 figures, a team, the kind of job people envy. Then one day, mid-presentation, she looked around the room and thought, I don't care. I don't care about any of this. And worse, I'm not even sure who I am without it. That moment, that's the crash. The moment the identity you've spent years building through choices, habits, and social masks crumbles. And when it does, it leaves a silence no to-do list can fill. We're told to find ourselves, but no one warns you that sometimes the old self has to fall apart first. And that falling apart isn't a sign you failed. It's a sign you've outgrown the container you were living in, like a snake shedding its skin. Painful, messy, but necessary. Tiny lesson? When your life starts feeling hollow, it doesn't always mean you've taken a wrong turn. Sometimes it means you're finally close to something real, something your soul has been whispering about for years. But here's the hard truth. After the crash, most people try to go back to what's familiar, even if it was unfulfilling. Because that void, the space between who you were and who you're becoming, can feel unbearable. So what happens if, instead of running from it, you sit inside that emptiness? That brings us to the next part of this journey, the void, when nothing feels urgent anymore. And it might just be the most misunderstood stage of all. The void, when nothing feels urgent anymore. After the crash comes, the quiet. Not peace exactly, not depression either. It's more like floating in space with no gravity, no direction, and no real desire to move. It's a strange place to be. The world around you keeps spinning, emails, deadlines, small talk, expectations. But inside, you're just still. You used to wake up with fire in your belly. Now it takes energy just to brush your teeth. You used to care about success, being impressive, being someone. Now it all feels like background noise in a movie you no longer want to star in. And maybe you've tried. Vision boards, affirmations, even those productivity hacks people swear by. But nothing sticks. You don't lack motivation. You lack a self to be motivated for. A close friend of mine, an ambitious musician, went through this after walking away from the label that nearly broke him. He told me, I thought I'd feel free. Instead, I felt blank, like all my songs belonged to someone I no longer was. And the worst part, I didn't know what kind of music I wanted to make anymore. That's the void. It's the in-between space where your old identity has crumbled, but your new self hasn't quite arrived. There's no map here, no obvious next step. And for those of us raised in a world obsessed with hustle, success, and linear progress, this stillness can feel terrifying. But it's not a dead end. It's an incubation. Tiny lesson? The void isn't where things stop. It's where the deeper questions finally start to surface. What do I actually want? Who am I without the noise? What would I create if no one was watching? These aren't questions you can answer on demand. They unfold slowly, through rest, through reflection, through patience. And in that slowness, something remarkable begins to happen. You start noticing what your soul has been whispering beneath the static. But there's one thing that often stops us from hearing those whispers: resistance. And that's what we'll explore next. Because the way we fight our fatigue, our sadness, our confusion, might actually be what's keeping us stuck in it. The persona shattered, Jung's warning and gift. Carl Jung had a word for the mask we wear to survive in the world. He called it the persona, the version of you designed to gain approval, to fit in, to be accepted, praised, and maybe even loved. It's not fake, it's functional. It's the smile you put on when you're falling apart inside. The overachiever who learned early on that being useful earns safety. The good girl, the strong man, the funny one, the fixer, the reliable one. All costumes, crafted not to deceive, but to protect. And they work for a while. But here's what Jung warned. If you stay inside your persona too long, you forget where the mask ends and you begin. I once knew someone, let's call her Sarah, who was the definition of success. Corporate exec, yoga certified, Instagram-worthy life. But in private, she was exhausted, burnt out from being everyone's everything, always on, always composed. Until one day, she sat in her car after a meeting, looked at her reflection and whispered, "I don't even know who I am without all this." That moment, that was her persona shattering. It's not always dramatic, sometimes it's subtle. But when it happens, you begin to see how much of your life was built to survive, not to be. Tiny lesson? Your persona isn't bad, it's just incomplete. It got you here, but it can't take you where you're meant to go next. And when it cracks, that's not a breakdown. That's the invitation, because beneath the mask is someone real, someone raw, someone scared, maybe, but also someone powerful in ways you've never allowed yourself to be. This is the beginning of something Jung called individuation, a lifelong journey of becoming who you actually are, not just who the world trained you to be. But here's the thing, that journey starts deep within, and it doesn't begin with effort. It begins with listening, which brings us to the next part of the story. The shadow speaks. What you avoid holds your power. Because once the persona falls, the shadow is often the first voice you'll hear. He shadows what you avoid holds your power. When the mask falls, what's underneath isn't always pretty. It's not all light and love. Sometimes it's rage, or sadness, or deep loneliness you didn't even know you were carrying. Carl Jung called this hidden part of us the shadow, the pieces we've exiled because somewhere along the way we were told they were bad, too much, or not enough. It's the anger you swallowed to stay polite, the tears you held back to seem strong, the dreams you gave up to be realistic. The shadow is all of it, everything you've pushed away but never truly lost. And here's the twist. Your shadow isn't here to hurt you, it's here to set you free. I once spoke with a man, Michael, who'd spent his whole life being the peacemaker. Never raised his voice, always agreeable. He was the nice guy everyone liked. But beneath the smile was a lifetime of unspoken resentment. He never said no, he never set boundaries, and eventually he burned out, quietly, invisibly. In therapy, he finally let himself feel the anger. At first, it scared him, but with time, he realized that anger wasn't dangerous, it was truth. The part of him that had been screaming, "This isn't working for me," that was his shadow speaking. Not to destroy his peace, but to protect it. Tiny lesson? The feelings you avoid aren't your enemies. They're messengers. Inside your fear is your courage. Inside your sadness is your capacity to feel deeply. Inside your anger is the part of you that knows where your boundaries belong. The shadow isn't something you fix. It's something you befriend, because when you stop running from it, you stop running from yourself. And that's when the real integration begins. But let's be honest, that process is messy. And the hardest part? It's not the emotion itself. It's the resistance to the emotion. So next, we're going to talk about that struggle, that exhausting inner fight we all have, and what happens when you finally decide to stop fighting it. In the next chapter, the resistance drain. Why fighting your feelings makes it worse. The resistance drain. Why fighting your feelings makes it worse. Have you ever felt tired, like soul deep tired, but instead of resting, you spiraled? You tell yourself, "What's wrong with me? I should be doing more. Why am I so lazy?" Suddenly, you're not just exhausted, you're ashamed. And that shame, it drains you even more. Here's the paradox most of us never learned. It's not the sadness, the fatigue, or even the fear that wears us out. It's the resistance to those feelings. It's the inner war we start every time we try to fix ourselves instead of feel ourselves. Carl Jung understood this well. He said, "What you resist not only persists, but grows in size." He wasn't just being poetic. He was describing what happens when we deny parts of our inner world. Think about it like this. Your feelings are like children tugging at your sleeve. They just want to be acknowledged. But when you ignore them or tell them to be quiet, they start screaming. A client of mine, Claire, once told me, "I don't even do that much anymore, but I'm still exhausted all the time." As we dug deeper, it turned out she wasn't resting, she was wrestling. Lying in bed, scrolling endlessly, judging herself for not being productive. Thinking, worrying, criticizing. Her body was still, but her mind was in a full-on battle. And that battle, that's what drained her. So I asked her to try something simple the next time that heaviness showed up. Instead of fighting it, just feel it, name it. I feel tired, I feel blank, and for now, that's okay. At first, it felt foreign, almost too gentle. But then something softened, and in that softness, a new kind of energy began to emerge. Not forced, not pressured, just honest. Tiny lesson? Rest isn't weak. It's how your nervous system heals. When you stop resisting your experience, you stop leaking energy. And when that happens, you create space for new energy to arise, naturally, not artificially. So if you're feeling heavy, flat, or disconnected, don't rush to fix it. Sit with it. Listen. Because buried beneath that stillness might be your next creative spark, your next true move. And that brings us to something beautiful, a truth we often forget. Your emotions aren't obstacles, they're raw materials. And when you learn to work with them, something extraordinary can happen. Next, we'll explore exactly that, the creative alchemy, turning sadness, fear, and laziness into art. The creative alchemy, turning sadness, fear, and laziness into art. What if your sadness isn't a block, but a doorway? What if your fear wasn't failure, but a flashlight pointing towards something meaningful? What if even your so-called laziness wasn't apathy, but a message from a wiser part of you saying, "Slow down, there's something here." This is where we enter the world of creative alchemy, the art of turning raw, uncomfortable emotion into something beautiful, honest, and deeply human. It's not a new idea. Some of the most moving works of art, literature, and music were born from the very feelings most of us try to avoid. Think of Frida Kahlo, who painted her physical pain and heartbreak into surreal self-portraits. Or Vincent van Gogh, whose loneliness became starry nights and swirling skies. Or Maya Angelou, who turned trauma into poetry that lit up generations. These artists didn't wait until they felt better. They created while they were feeling, and that's what made their work real. One of my clients, David, was stuck in what he called a fog of nothing. No ideas, no energy, no direction. I asked him to try something small. Don't write a good poem. Write an honest one. Let your laziness speak. Let your fog write the first line. What came out wasn't polished, but it was alive. It had weight. And within that roughness, a new voice began to take shape. That's how creativity works. It doesn't always come from joy or clarity. Sometimes it arrives through the tension, through contradiction. So try this. Give your emotions a pen, a paintbrush, a voice. Write a letter from your fear. Let your sadness become a character in a short story. Turn your tiredness into a song called The Art of Doing Nothing. Tiny lesson? You don't need to wait to be inspired. Inspiration lives inside the mess. You just have to stop judging it long enough to let it speak. Because when you stop pushing your emotions away and start playing with them, something opens. Something honest, something real. And when that realness begins to move through you, you don't just feel better, you start to remember what matters. That's the magic of creative alchemy. But now we have to ask the next question. If your motivation doesn't come from pressure, deadlines, or performance, then where does it come from? In the next chapter, we'll explore the answer, from force to flow, listening for soul-level direction. From force to flow, listening for soul-level direction. Not all movement is progress, and not all stillness is stuckness. Sometimes the most meaningful direction you'll ever take doesn't start with a plan, but with a whisper. In a world that constantly tells us to hustle, push harder, optimize, produce, it's easy to forget that there's another kind of motivation, a quieter one that doesn't come from pressure, but from resonance. Carl Jung believed we are guided by something deeper than logic. He called it the self, with a capital S. Not the identity, not the ego, but the totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious, shadow and light. And the self doesn't yell. It doesn't use alarms, deadlines, or shame. It speaks in symbols, in nudges, in strange dreams, soft longings, or a sentence in a book that stops you cold and makes you whisper, "Wait, that feels like me." I remember a woman named Elena who had spent over a decade in finance. She wasn't unhappy, but something felt off. She'd always loved plants, grew them everywhere in her apartment. One afternoon, walking home, she passed a tiny flower shop for the 100th time. Only this time, she felt something shift. She walked in. 6 months later, she'd left her job and opened her own space. Half floral design, half quiet sanctuary. She didn't plan it. She followed it. That quiet tug, that soul-level yes that logic couldn't explain. But her whole being understood. Tiny lesson? When you stop forcing, you start feeling. And when you start feeling, you begin to notice the soft breadcrumbs your soul has been leaving you all along. This doesn't mean you'll always get a crystal clear sign, but it does mean learning to notice what feels light, what feels honest, what makes you exhale, even just a little. So the next time you feel the urge to move, to start, to shift, don't ask, is this productive? Ask, does this feel true? Because the self doesn't care if your action is efficient. It only cares if your action is real. Now, of course, this leads to a big question. If I'm listening to my soul, what do I do with my ego? Isn't it supposed to be the enemy? Actually, not at all. In the next chapter, we'll explore that misunderstanding and how your ego, when aligned with the self, can become one of your greatest allies. Coming up next, rebuilding a healthy ego. It's not about killing the self. Rebuilding a healthy ego. It's not about killing the self. There's a myth in spiritual spaces that goes something like this. The ego is bad. Kill it. Get rid of it. Transcend it. But Carl Jung didn't believe that. And honestly, neither do I. Because the ego at its core isn't evil. It's the part of you that says I and knows how to survive in the world. It helps you make decisions, navigate relationships, pay your bills, get out of bed and say, this is who I am. We need an ego. We just don't need it to be the one driving the entire vehicle. Imagine your soul is the artist and your ego is the assistant. The ego takes the vision and helps bring it into form. But when the assistant starts thinking they're the artist, things get messy. I once met a man, Chris, who had a spiritual awakening that rocked his entire identity. He quit his job, sold his stuff, shaved his head, went off grid. For a while, it felt freeing, but eventually, he felt lost. Disconnected, disorganized, floating in insight with no ground beneath him. He hadn't killed his ego, he'd abandoned it. And now, he had no container to hold the wisdom he'd found. So slowly, gently, he began rebuilding, this time from a new place. He started a conscious business rooted in purpose, not status. He still used calendars, spreadsheets, strategies, but they served him, not the other way around. That's a healthy ego, an ego in service to the self. Tiny lesson? You don't have to choose between soul and structure. The goal is integration. Let your routines have rhythm. Let your plans hold space for presence. Let your boundaries protect your tenderness. Because when your ego and self work together, you stop fighting with yourself and start moving with clarity. Now, you might be wondering, how do I actually live this way day to day? Not just feel it in quiet moments, but bring it into the reality of work, bills, family, and the chaos of modern life. That's exactly what we'll explore next. In the upcoming chapter, The Sacred Mundane, How to Live Softly and Still Get Things Done. The Sacred Mundane, How to Live Softly and Still Get Things Done. It's one thing to feel aligned in stillness, on a walk through the woods, in a quiet meditation, or after a moment of deep reflection. But what about Monday morning? What about emails, deadlines, rent, school drop-offs, or the fourth meeting that could have been an email? This is where so many people get stuck. They awaken to something deeper, but then wonder, how do I keep living in the real world without slipping back into the old patterns? The truth is, You don't need to choose between being spiritual or structured, between softness or success. You can be both. In fact, you're meant to be. I once worked with a woman named Jess who was rebuilding her life after burnout. She wanted to live slower, more intentionally. But she also ran a business, had 2 kids, and a team to lead. We didn't scrap her schedule. We softened it. Instead of forcing 5 a.m. wake-ups and rigid goal tracking, she created what she called soul anchors, 3 small things each day that kept her grounded. A morning stretch with music, a 5-minute journaling check-in, and a 20-minute tech-free walk after lunch. She still met her deadlines, still managed her team. But now, she did it from a place of rhythm, not rush. She stopped managing her energy like a machine and started tending to it like a garden. Tiny lesson? Structure doesn't have to suffocate you. When infused with presence, even the mundane becomes sacred. Folding laundry can be a meditation. Writing emails can be a form of care. Cooking dinner can be a ritual of gratitude. It's not about what you do, it's about how you meet it. So no, you don't need to escape the world to live meaningfully. You just need to return to it with different eyes, eyes that see the divine in the ordinary. And when life inevitably gets overwhelming again, because it will, you now have tools, not to control everything, but to reconnect with yourself in the midst of it. Which brings us to the final part of this journey, a reminder of what it all points back to, the real you that's been here all along, waiting to be felt, heard, expressed. The emergence, the self is waiting for you to listen. By now, you've probably realized something. This journey, from ego death through the void into shadow, stillness, and soul, was never about becoming someone new. It was always about remembering someone true. The self, your truest essence, was never gone. It was just waiting. Waiting beneath the noise, beneath the doing, the proving, the pretending, beneath the layers you thought you had to wear in order to be loved. It waited in your sadness, in your slowness, in your longing for something real. And now you've made space to hear it. You've felt the crash. You've sat in the void. You've faced the shadow. You've stopped resisting. You've turned discomfort into creativity and pressure into presence. That's no small thing. That's alchemy. That's becoming whole. And here's the most powerful part. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to keep listening to the quiet impulses, to the dreams that make no sense but won't go away, to the soft inner yes that doesn't shout but hums with truth. This is the emergence. Not flashy, not loud, but real. And the more you trust it, the more you act from that still, knowing place inside you, the more life begins to respond. New ideas, unexpected connections, moments of deep alignment that feel less like effort and more like remembering how to breathe. Final lesson, you don't have to chase purpose. You become it. Every time you show up with honesty, every time you move in a way that feels like you, every time you let your truth shape your next small step. So wherever you are right now, whether you're still in the void or already starting to feel that quiet spark, you're not behind. You're right on time. And if this message spoke to something deep in you, something you haven't had words for until now, maybe that's yourself saying, yes, keep going, I'm still here. Thank you for walking this path with me, and now I'd love to hear from you. Where are you in your own emergence? What part of this journey resonated with you the most? Leave a comment below, because your voice matters, and your story, it might be the spark someone else has been waiting for. Until next time, be soft, be honest, and above all, be you.